All right, so we are delighted to welcome you to this iteration of the Journal of the Civil War Era's webinars, which began in the summer in part in response to cancellation of conferences. And as our ability to gather together continues to be to be delayed. We've been able to continue them over the fall, and this is the middle of our fall webinars. Our final one for the fall will be forthcoming on December the 3rd, Thursday, December the 3rd at this time, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, with Dr. Alexandra Finley, speaking about her recently published book, An Intimate Economy, Enslaved Women Work in America's Domestic Slave Trade. So Thursday, December the 3rd at 4 p.m. And so we will, you can sign up for that at the JCWE site. This will be posted once we're done with as a recording on the YouTube page of the JCWE, and we'll live there. We're also finishing a schedule for the early part of the 2021, in which the continuation of conference cancellations, we will be hosting a series of talks that we will be publicizing a little bit later as we complete the last parts of the schedule. So you can be on the lookout for a number of exciting talks. But for all of the many talks that we have taken, none have been in quite the format and with quite the range of participants and people that we will have today. Usually we begin with a long introduction of the individual person. If we did that this time, we would manage to find that the hour would be spent before we were done introducing, because I think it reflects the depth and range of people who are really interested in the issue that we'll be talking about today. People who've been working on the treasure trove of 19th century governors' papers. So in our questions, we will ask people to introduce themselves, as they begin. But as you can see, our panelists today, along with Kate Masur and myself from the JCWE, include Patrick Lewis from the Filson Historical Society, Charles Welsko from the Kentucky Historical Society, Lesley Gordon from the University of Alabama, Julia Brock from the University of Alabama, Susannah Ural from the University of Southern Mississippi, and Stephanie Seal Walters from George Mason University. So we're delighted to have all of you all here with us today, and are looking forward to a really exciting conversation. We're going to begin at the beginning, in wrestling with what the governor's papers are and also how the digital projects have evolved. It made sense that we would begin with a narrative of how some of these projects came into being and how they've changed. And so to get us started off, in part to keeping in line with the order in which some of the other ones began, we thought that we would begin with the project in Kentucky and with Chuck and Patrick. And I think, Chuck, you were going to go first, if I'm right.
I think that was the plan.
Briefly introduce yourself, and then talk about your ideas about the origins of the Kentucky project, and then we'll pass over to Patrick.
Sure, thanks, Greg. And thank you, Greg, Kate, and everybody at the JCWE for having us here. This is a big group, and I'm really excited to be here. I'm Chuck Welsko. I am the project director of the Civil War Governors of Kentucky Digital Documentary Edition. I promise, just like all of us with the long titles, if we all used our long titles, that would take up like a third of the time that we would be talking. I'll just call it CWGK. I got my Ph.D. with Jason Phillips last year at West Virginia University. Largely speaking, I'm a cultural historian of borderlands, asking questions of nationalism and identity and loyalty. So in some way, running to Kentucky seemed like a logical choice to look at the contested borderland that develops in Kentucky. I'm going to give a quick kind of overview running the project now of what CWGK is and why we use governor's papers. And then I'm going to kick it over to Patrick, who spent much of his young career, building CWGK and kind of handing me the keys to a really nice running car, as we transitioned over. CWGK itself began roughly a decade ago. The Kentucky Historical Society had spent time working with the University Press of Kentucky, publishing print versions of governor's papers, the documentary editions like the Lincoln Papers or Freedom, the history of emancipation, all told through documents. But for CWGK, for the Civil War, we thought of something more ambitious, right? We thought that the war demanded something more ambitious, in part because there are 5 Civil War governors of Kentucky, 3 Unionists and 2 Confederates. So just like us, a big panel, a big group of people who ran the state. But it might surprise you, or it might not, that we actually don't really care about the governors themselves. Susannah and Lesley and Patrick and Stephanie and Julia can add on to this, but we don't actually care about those individuals. What we care about is that their office sits at the intersection of what we would say everyday life, both the mundane and kind of the exemplary or the extraordinary aspects of the Civil War, right? So civil appointments, court appointments, political campaigns, the kind of basic mundane things, petitions for redress of grievances or crimes, felonies, or misdemeanors. But then also the large things that impact the Civil War, the mobilization of militaries, the constant amount of guerrilla warfare that infects Kentucky between 1861 and 1865. And perhaps most importantly, the slow erosion of slavery in the state of Kentucky. All of these things building together to help us complicate the narrative and focus down on the lives of individuals, men, women, Unionists, Confederates, African Americans who write to these governors, asking for them to insert themselves into their daily lives. And we use a variety of different ways to unpack those individuals and not really focus on the governors, but on the people who are writing to them. And I think that's a really good kind of broad overview. And then I can kick it to Patrick or back to you, Greg, or however you guys want to do this, and get kind of how that process developed.
Go for it, Patrick. Thank you.
Right on over. All right. Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Greg. I'm Patrick Lewis. I'm currently the Director of Collections and Research at the Filson Historical Society in Louisville. And up until last year, I was the Director of CWGK. Kind of as Chuck said, about a decade ago, Kentucky was having a historiographical moment. This is in the context of Ann Marshall's book was about to come out. Aaron Astor's book was about to come out. We had read these dissertations. Everyone was excited about them. Chris Phillips had God knows how many grad students producing really excellent dissertations on the border of the Ohio River. And so Kentucky was thinking about what we could do to make a mark on the 150th anniversary of the war. This is coming off of the bicentennial of Abraham Lincoln's birth, which was a big deal in Kentucky. And there was quite a bit of funding and public history and touring exhibits and all the like that had gone around KHS. So there was a bit of a holdover from that. And the initial proposal, as Chuck said, was to do a print volume through UPK. But even on our very earliest sort of scans through the archive, we realized that that was just not going to cover the breadth and depth of perspective that we had here. And we looked at those really excellent books that were coming out around those times, and the dissertations, and I was in the midst of my dissertation research as well on a sort of classically divided Kentucky topic. And we were a little bit dissatisfied with the range of perspectives that the archive could provide us at the time, right? What existed at UK and at KHS and at the Filson, it skewed Central Kentucky. It obviously skewed elite. It skewed Confederate. And those were biases that were built into those institutions decades and decades past. But it was really sort of restricting where we thought the historiography could go. And you know, as KHS was a publisher of a peer-reviewed journal and a consortium member of UPK, you know, we were really concerned about enabling a new wave of scholarship to come. And so around 2008, 2009, started doing some initial document surveys, some planning. By 2012, we had hit our first National Endowment for the Humanities grant, which allowed us to really scale up and start doing document identification and scanning over at the state archives, eventually at the state military archives, which are still owned by the National Guard for weird administrative reasons. And so then by 2016, with funding from the NHPRC, which is the funding wing of the National Archives, we were able to put up our first 10,000 transcribed and imaged documents, which is not nearly everything that we have possessed. Even at that time, we had 23,000 scanned documents in hand, but not transcribed. And then since then, we've worked in a couple of different ways. The first is making historiographical impact with what has been up. already, right? And so we convened a conference with a number of, Amy Taylor recruited a number of fantastic folks, Lesley was among them, to come to Frankfurt, do work in the edition, share that work in a sort of a seminar style, and then we published a special issue of the Register of the Kentucky Historical Society that contained that, really with a roadmap of where this research needs to head using some of these really rich case studies. So we started exploiting what we had already, and then we started building upon it and doing really detailed social network and research analysis of every person, place, and organization that appears within these records, which is turning into, you know, sort of really the most radical and largest project of social history that's been undertaken in this state. And that is, of course, slower going, but the results that we're getting out of it, again, are giving us even another layer of deeper perspective on the lives that and the voices that we capture in this very small instant where they happen to interact with whatever's happening in Frankfurt, or in the Confederate case in Bowling Green or wherever they are, often on the road. But we're able to sort of branch that out and make some connections across space and time. And so then as we had those documents out and published and started, you know, proactively getting in touch with Civil War historians and saying, hey, I know you've not thought about Kentucky, but there are some things that overlap with your scholarly interest and you need to come look at this, then that sort of got us the attention of Susannah and Lesley, and here we are.
All right, thank you so much for that overview of how the project in Kentucky got started. I just wanted to mention, for those of you who are attending in the audience, this is a webinar format, and so we really encourage you to ask questions, and the way you can do that is using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any questions either now or later, you can put those in the Q&A using the Q&A button. We'll be able to see them, and down the road a little bit, we'll be able to ask those questions of the panelists. So let's now go to Mississippi. I think the next project that took shape was the project in the Mississippi Governor's Papers, and kind of hear how you all conceived of your project and you know, building on what had been going on in Kentucky already.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Just real quick, thank you for hosting this. And hey, everybody, I'm Susannah Ural. I'm a professor of history at the University of Southern Mississippi, and I'm also the lucky director of the Civil War and Reconstruction Governors of Mississippi project. My colleague, well, she's right below me on this kind of Brady Bunch screen here, but I don't know, wherever you see Steph Walters, I'll let Steph introduce herself, but we fortunately snatched her up at USM about 1.5 years ago. And I was able to bring her onto this project as our assistant editor. But you know, we really got started on this probably, gosh, Patrick, you and I met at the Society of Civil War Historians meeting. I can picture.
Chattanooga, yeah.
Where was it? Chattanooga?
It was Chattanooga, yeah.
I'm like, it's a ballroom, which narrows it down to nothing.
I remember it was the week we had first launched the initial 10,000 documents and transcriptions. And so I had an iPad and I was going around like a traveling salesman, like, look at our new thing.
Yeah. And you know, most of us who work in Civil War era documents, regardless of kind of how we come to this field, right? I tend to come as a military historian and as a war and society scholar, but all of us have learned over the years the value of these governor's papers, as Chuck and Patrick have articulated. I mean, it's just this wonderful way to get at these voices that you often can't find in traditional collections. And so I was interested with what Patrick was showing me, and I had also kind of been moving toward digital humanities in my own research. I love, it's not just the kind of the analytical tools that DH provides, but it's also the accessibility that it allows, right? And so the idea of taking this incredibly rich collection and making it freely available online to basically anybody who has internet connection, and also to really make it searchable in ways that, I mean, one of the things we're working on is you know, these subject tagging protocols that help people realize what they can explore in these collections, right? That you might not think about exploring arrest and criminal justice development during this time period, right? So DH just lets you not only make things accessible, but also kind of discoverable. And it's one of the things that brought Kentucky, Mississippi, and Alabama together to think about ways, we formed this consortium to think about ways that we can kind of help each other with these efforts, and also encourage other projects in other states. I mean, we would love to see northern states get involved with this. Patrick had the great idea of bringing in, Minnesota or the Dakotas, because wouldn't it be great to have, kind of the Sioux War represented, and it just, wow, it's just kind of endless what the possibilities are. So we were fortunate in the sense that Mississippi's state archives were interested in not only partnering with us, we've got 20,000 documents that we're digitizing, transcribing, and annotating. So you're going to have to make it a partnership. Or at least I decided I was only going to do it if it was a partnership. And so the state archives, our partners there, are not only did they already have all the governor's papers already collected at the state archives, it was part of its original mission. They are responsible for all the digitization and the quality review of that process. Those records then get transferred to the Mississippi Digital Library, which is kind of a massive state repository of digital collections, housed at the University of Southern Mississippi, and they help oversee the writing of metadata for all those documents before they go online. Our documents then go online at a place called From the Page. It's a great user-friendly transcription service. And by the way, we are in need and we are calling for volunteer transcribers now. So go to From the Page. We would love to have your help. And that's where we transcribe and do that subject tagging I mentioned earlier, so that, if you kind of have an enslaved person showing up in a collection here and they show up later in our Reconstruction era collections, you're going to be able to see how, their lives are transitioning. You can see how developments took place within kind of counties and communities. You can see how individuals impacted certain trends. So all of this is becoming just, it's amazing what's possible now through DH and through these governor collections. And I'll let Steph speak to kind of how, her role kind of within the project and how kind of what DH is making possible.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Seal-Walters. I am the assistant editor to CWRGM, and I'm the digital liaison to the humanities at Southern Miss. I kind of have an interesting role at Southern Miss right now, where I basically help take the lead of a bunch of digital projects that we have and assist professors and students with any kind of digital needs that they might have. I am trained at the university, at George Mason University, where I had fellowships at the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media. And so I am a digital historian. However, I do, my specialty is actually early America. So this is actually a lot of fun for me. But anyway, at Southern Miss, my role is helping Susannah and our team of fantastic student workers basically transcribe, tag, and annotate all of these different documents. I am the person, I noticed Sarah Brumfield is in the audience, who is one of the co-creators of From the Page. I'm the one who uploads all of those documents into From the Page. I serve as a first and second reviewer to make sure that everything is tagged correctly. I noticed Lindsay Peterson, who's also one of our fantastic student workers, is watching as well. She helps me with that. And then I created our sample doc website, which started with about 80 documents that went live. What, Susannah, that was in August is when we went live with that, and have helped facilitate teachers who have been creating syllabi for the documents that we put up online. But basically, I am to help in this very early role, but as soon as we start getting more documents online, we're going to start running some really interesting statistics on some of the documents, including text analysis. We've been geolocating a lot of the locations in our documents, so creating maps to be able to see where everyone's coming from and who all is contacting their governor during the Civil War and Reconstruction eras. And also really exciting, Susannah and I were able to get a course passed at Southern Miss that's going to be taught in the spring. I'm teaching that class, which is Humanities 402 and 502, where we're going to have undergraduate and graduate students using the Civil War and Reconstruction Governors of Mississippi project to start running some of these early statistics and create some new maps for us. So it's a really exciting time. And Sue, did I miss anything important in that, or I think we got it?
No, I just want to make sure we give a shout out to Annalise Daner, who is our—
Oh, Annalise, I didn't even see her in there. Hi, Annalise.
And I mean, she Patrick, if I remember right, I mean, she really kind of designed CWGK. I mean, she's just phenomenal for projects like these. If you ever need a digital developer who understands how historians think, give her a call.
She's phenomenal. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much. And one of the things I just want to highlight, also as someone who's been mildly involved in digital projects at my own university, is how these projects bring together people from a variety of different fields and kinds of training. So you've talked about archivists, librarians, digital humanities people, historians, right? All of the teachers incorporating it into their teaching, students doing some of the stuff. So these are just really collaborative, big projects that engage a lot of different people. So now I want to go over to the Alabama project and have you guys talk a little bit about how it came into existence and where you guys fit into the story. Lesley.
Yeah, thank you, Kate, and Greg. Thank you so much for putting this together and having us talk about these projects. So my introduction to this whole concept came with Patrick, because he invited me to come to Frankfurt. Well, he invited me to start exploring the Kentucky governor's papers on my own. And essentially the idea was just see what you can find, see if you can find anything relevant to your own current project, or maybe something in the future, whatever. And so it was sort of exciting to do it. And it was it's like nothing I've ever done before, right? I think most of us, when we write our books, our articles, we come up with the idea and then we have to go find the documents. But here I had this opportunity to just be let in, sort of, the gates were open, go see what you can find. And I ended up writing a piece that was published in the registers and in the Kentucky Register in the special issue they did, I think it was last summer, about a regiment from Kentucky. And I've been exploring these concepts of cowardice for a while, and I was really intrigued by that. And I just sort of did a word search, which also had some problems associated with it, because you find things that are not useful at all. But the long and short of it was that it was incredibly gratifying, the whole experience. And it was a relatively short amount of time. I was able to put together, a coherent article length paper. And it struck me, I knew Susannah had gotten interested in this and was starting up in Mississippi. So I started wondering if we could do it here in the state of Alabama. And I was joined by Julia Brock, who is our public historian here at Alabama. And she joined our faculty just a couple of years ago. And we just started talking about it. And it was kind of thing where I could not in any way do this by myself. I'm not a digital historian. I don't see myself ever declaring that I'm a digital historian, but I was excited about the possibilities of us starting this and developing relationships in the state. And we reached out to the archivists in Montgomery, and I know a couple of them are here. So we're very happy to have them and their help. And they were definitely on board. We went down to Montgomery and had a meeting. And since then, it's been about a year and a half. We've talked to folks at Auburn. We've been thinking about hopefully joining with a HBCU in the state and looking for other partners within the state. But in addition, because, I know I already knew Patrick and Susannah and then met Chuck, is that we developed this consortium amongst us as a model, and that we could add on other states. And the idea, it's a big plan, and it's something that's going to be years in the making. But what we're hoping is that there will be the opportunity for, whether it's scholars or teachers or just the public at large, to explore these projects combined, right? To be looking for, one of the examples I know, Susannah, you often use, right, is, the Emancipation Proclamation. How was it being viewed and reacted to, the on the ground here in Alabama compared to on the ground in Mississippi, and then on the ground in Kentucky? This kind of thing that I think we can start to move toward. And it's not that historians haven't asked these questions before; they have, but the idea is that access to these documents can challenge and change the assumptions we have. And we can talk more about that later, but I'm very excited about that. I think it's rare that you could have this happen, right, in a field where we have access to these kind of documents and they're so diverse, and that we can potentially be changing the historiography. So I'm going to let Julia add on anything she'd like to.
Well, that was a great overview, Lesley. I just wanted to say thank you all for having us. I'm Julia Brock, and as Lesley said, I'm in the history department. I'm an assistant professor, but my primary professional identity is a public historian. And so we may talk a little bit about how public historians fit into this. And so I'll leave that perhaps for a later moment.
I realize I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Lesley Gordon. I'm the Charles T. Summersall Professor, Chair of Southern History at Alabama. And I think, yeah, that's enough for that.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. There's so many things on the table. We already have one question submitted through Q&A, and we'll get to that soon. And I want to encourage others to submit questions through Q&A. There were, a couple of things that might make sense to help people get a sense of what these papers are like. Some of you all mentioned the sort of incredible richness of the governor's papers, and then in some ways the counterintuitive for people who haven't worked in them, richness of them. And I wonder if you could just give us a flavor of, what are some of the things, the discoveries that people can find in governor's papers that might have, as you said at the opening, nothing to do with the governors, but a lot to do with the fabric of people's everyday lives.
Real quick, if it's okay with y'all, I was going to put a link in the chat to take, okay, I'm going to just put this so everybody can go to one of the things Steph built for our project. I just put the link in the chat is just, I collected 80 sample documents from across our entire collection. And when we set it up, I talked a lot with Patrick about, okay, what did you do that you're thrilled with? And what did you do that you wish you had maybe done differently? And again, that's the whole point of our consortium, is that we can all kind of keep learning from each other. We can take our own approaches, but maybe standardize some of our approaches. And so one of the things I wanted to do was come up with just this sampling of the collection to help people understand what are these and how do they help us kind of think about the time period. And so what you'll see is I categorized it into 4 themes of memory and commemoration, emancipation, and basically kind of the changing definition of citizenship, civilians and divided loyalties on the home front, and military, the kind of the soldier and military experience. And it's if you want, you can kind of explore that. I'll let my other colleagues kind of talk to some of their findings. But I think one of the things I'm most excited about is, in talking with colleagues when we were setting this up, we really decided to make sure we covered basically the long Civil War era. So we start in 1859 and we actually go all the way through 1882. Our partners at MDAH have just been wonderful about supporting my hope to go. I really wanted to kind of extend through the end of Reconstruction so people can really kind of study what happens when you thoroughly abandon a lot of the Reconstruction era policies designed to protect the rights of all Mississippians. And as those get abandoned, what are the results of that? And so you can see some of this in the sample documents that have just allowed us to hear and witness these incredible experiences from an incredibly diverse group of Mississippians. And by the way, if you're exploring in there, do a search for Lambert Moore. It's one of my favorite documents of the collection. I'll just leave it at that.
I think in an unexpected way, one of the things that I was not expecting in terms of the distribution of documents, even within the official governor's papers, was the number of pardon applications that came in. They are over 50% of the Kentucky governor's papers during the Civil War era. We found in a lot of ways that increasingly the pardon is being used as a safety valve to maintain social order and community control at a time where the scale of this war and this crisis is so much bigger than 19th century governance can handle. It's not equipped for anything like this, especially not in a place like Kentucky, which is an active battleground, as we obviously know the guerrilla war spirals out of control after always. But particularly in 1864 and 1865, and you feed this into the context of knowing the dissatisfaction about emancipation among the white population in this state, among that Union population in this state, but seeing really in minor ways how things as trivial as failure to pay new taxes that were passed to support the war has landed people in some economic hardship. And as they write for a pardon for not paying their I don't know, their tavern license this year, because they didn't know it, because the rebels burned the mail wagons that were carrying the new laws down to their county. True story. That, you know, you can sort of see this very intimate and personal disruption of daily life that has anything to do with somebody on a horse with a gun coming to your farm and taking your whatever, right? But you can sort of get this growing sense of frustration with the government and with their inability to control anything. On the opposite end, while we say that we don't focus so much on the governor, you can also sense their helplessness. Which is really touching in a lot of ways. They can be, you know, cruel people. Obviously, you know, all of our governors enslave people, so we know they ain't great. But you know, you can sort of sense this humanity and this recognition that really the tools at their disposal are just really wholly insufficient. And yeah, this is not a new thesis in Civil War historiography, but I feel like seeing that from the ground up and seeing the way that actual people live that is just so much more powerful. As a Kentucky historian as well, seeing that play out in all sorts of different communities gives us a new ability to reach out and ground these themes that we've seen, you know, in the books of members of the SCWH, but be able to ground them locally and to be able to go out and communicate those with folks who would not otherwise listen to those stories has been incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and one thing I wanted to add to the overview of our project, we are just in the very early beginnings of it, and it just speaks to, again, the time it's going to take. But at the archives, they have digitized more than 10,000 documents already, estimating there will be a total of 70,000. And of those, we have seen samples, and just getting the samples are incredibly insightful. For example, we saw just in a handful of the ones that were shared with us about a week ago, this is in relation to the issue of impressment. And so there's discussion going on, you know, between the governor's office and then slave owners about the fact that either their slaves or slaves in their community are being impressed, right, by the military, by the Confederate Army. In one case, they're being used to build fortifications at Fort Henry. And then there's a discussion about the fairness of it. There's one letter where a person is writing to the governor to complain. And in fact, the quote was that it was unjust and wicked. And that has nothing to do with the enslavement of human beings. That has to do, right, with these owners who are put out that their own slaves are being used by the military. So like Patrick suggests, you know, these kind of questions, is not that they're brand new, but I think it's adding nuance and richness to things that need a fresh look. And so to see that kind of debate going on in Alabama, and this is all happening, this is 1861. 1861 to the late 1861, 1862, discussions over, the power of the state. And this is one of the favorite questions, right, in Civil War history and in issues over Confederate nationalism, but also the states that are bucking against these broader laws. One more thing I'd say too is one of the things that we saw in these samples was discussion. This is in December of 1860 over secession, and so this is a conversation between the governors of Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi, and they're all talking about what they're going to do, what's going to happen to federal lands. So again, it's that, yes, these are powerful people, these are people of privilege, but of course, what they're doing, their decisions are affecting a wide swath of population. And these are the questions of the day, right? Secession, impressment. So as I said earlier, I think it really is going to add to the historiography.
Yeah, and really quickly, right, the range, kind of going to Susannah, she's got about 80 some documents now, or somewhere in that range, right? We've got about 10,000 that are up on CWGK, and whether it's
80, they're just not all up, man.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I'm kidding you. Yeah, we'll have 4.
You have 80 that are up and that are like transcribed. Yeah, we're freely open. I stepped in it there, right? But we've got 10,000 that are up, and right, you can have a bumbling gun smuggling operation, right? I think that was what Patrick hooked me in with when I like interviewed for the job. One of our most used stories, right? The enslaved woman who's accused of murdering a child, and how that kind of spirals and gives African-American voices. A case I came across recently, right? An enslaved man who's ordered by his master to kill another white man, and kind of goes through this process of trying to avoid doing that for an extended period of time, and ends up having to kill him, and it spirals into a lynching, but not of the black man, of the white man. And a series of other kind of stories where you can pull out these different voices, and right, the building of how does a state that doesn't really secede but creates its own Confederate government build that government. Spoiler alert, they just like kick in the front door of a home and go, we own this now, this is a government building. So kind of the range of documents, right? And I'm sure Lesley and Susannah are gonna, I think they even have more documents than, or forecasting more documents than we're gonna have. So I'm super excited to see all the things that they're gonna end up putting out.
Okay, well, thank you so much for those tantalizing examples from all the different projects. I want to go to a few of the questions now, and we can kind of alternate, but between our questions and the questions coming in. But I thought this would also give a chance maybe for Stephanie to talk a little bit about some of the technical side of the projects. There were a few questions about metadata, and any of us who have used digitized sources know that metadata is absolutely critical for finding things. So one question, just to read it out loud, is how have you handled the writing of the metadata of these digital documents? Do you have separate people composing the metadata in advance of posting online? So kind of procedural, how do you do that? And then also, is metadata being created for each document individually, or do you have folders that contain certain documents on similar topics and then a broad metadata for the folder? So, I'm sure this could be the topic of an entire panel, but just give us some information, maybe starting with Stephanie, because your expertise is squarely in digital humanities. And then, maybe if there are differences among the projects, we could hear a little bit about that.
Definitely. Thank you. And Susannah, please feel free to jump in here too, because Susannah is quite the metadata queen. Even I don't know if she'll take this title. Yeah, see, she's saying no, but it's true. We're very fortunate in that at least at CWRGM, we have some grant funded student workers who a part of their job for us is they create metadata for every single document that we have. There has also been, Susannah, where exactly did Austin come from? What grant was he funded by?
So the Watson Brown Foundation, which is well known to Civil War historians, thanks to Tad Brown, was one of our grant funders who I realized very early on that, getting to your question, Kate, our arrangement with Mississippi Digital Library is that no document goes online until it has metadata, for the very reason you note. Otherwise, it's just this massive document dump that you can't even really search. And so the Watson Brown Foundation funds entirely focused just on a single digital archivist, Austin Justice, who just does fantastic work of helping to oversee a lot of the work that our student workers, our student researchers are doing. And then Steph, of course, takes a lot of that metadata. It's originally generated at the state archives. We then generate more and review it down here. But long story short, Steph then makes sure that metadata also gets transferred to the documents when they go to From the Page, thanks to some development work that the Brumfields did at From the Page. And then our digital developer, Annalise Daner, makes sure that metadata, of course, goes to our own Mecca site, which will launch in June of 2021 with our first 4,000 documents. So yeah, metadata, I'm the metadata queen in the sense that I recognize and embrace the fact that it is absolutely essential. I am not the metadata queen in the sense that I don't enjoy metadata work.
But we do have a bunch of phenomenal student workers who create our metadata on a daily basis. And like Susannah said, it goes attached to every single one of our documents. Anytime anything is uploaded into From the Page, it is already attached. So it's really nice. All of our metadata comes in. And then Annalise is helping to create a plugin that will then move everything over to a Mecca S once everything's transcribed, tagged, geolocated, filled with metadata. So hopefully there'll be these perfect forms that go over to our Mecca S site.
But Julia, correct me if I'm wrong, isn't Alabama interested in developing something where maybe some of the documents could go up From the Page and the metadata could be written there? I feel like I've heard somebody talking about that, which is different, and it's a cool way to get maybe the public involved with metadata.
Well, so Meredith McDonough and Steve Murray, Meredith is an archivist, Steve Murray's director of the Alabama Department of Archives and History. They're in the virtual audience, so I'm sorry they can't chime in, but we're sort of still in discussion. I think they do have, I mean, what's amazing about working with them is that they have rich experience doing kind of crowdsourced transcription, most recently on a collection of World War I documents. So that has been a part of the conversation. But yeah, I think we're in such an early stage that we get to sort of build with them a process that may look like Mississippi's, but may look a little bit differently based on, you know, our needs and from the page and all of our partners. So yeah.
Does anyone else want to chime in on this question of metadata? I feel like it segues into another question that I wanted to ask, but because you guys are talking about how much work it is, right? How much labor it is to actually turn these documents into things that can be found and be used. And so to me, that the question of metadata connects to the question of funding. And I bet people in the audience would also be curious to know, because these are such big projects that employ many people, like where does the funding come from? And, you know, if people were thinking about trying to launch a project at a different state, how would they kind of think about getting that underway?
That's a really fantastic question. And as we've brought this consortium together over the past year or so, and have been really thinking about not only the ways that we all can start and sustain projects, but then how we might be able to bring other projects on board. I feel sad to say, like we've come to this states' rights model where we recognize that the way this looks on the ground in any given state is going to vary based on the institutions that are open to participating and are able to participate. And I think that's the bigger hurdle to clear right now. And you know, so in our case in Kentucky, we were trying to launch this project right into the teeth of the budget cuts that followed the 2008 recession. And so, you know, a lot of that initial work that our project had done to assemble this sort of statewide coalition that involved a number of partners beyond the Kentucky Historical Society, it really just sort of fell apart as everybody was watching, you know, their primary work disintegrate in front of them in 2009 and 2010. And so KHS ended up taking on a lot of that work itself. And using, again, funding from the NEH, the NHPRC, carrying over some private funds that had been you know, left over from the Lincoln Bicentennial, but then also raising some money directly for that. There's a hefty proportion of state support that comes in there as well that underwrites salaries. But in a lot of ways that, you know, that also made us have to think creatively about the partnerships we created down the line. So for example, when it came time to start doing biographical research on all these individuals that we were trying to annotate, you know, the hiring those through the state system really didn't work the way state positions exist. And obviously, if we had been at a university where you have this vast resource of graduate students who need both the employment and the experience, that would be a natural. So we had to kind of rig this system up of graduate research assistants that come from all over the country. And now it's been a really fantastic networking tool for us to sort of work with emerging scholars across the country. But again, that was sort of a happy accident that you know, if things had played out differently in our timeline, then maybe those would have all have been located at U of L or UK or something. As it is, they've come from you know, good Lord, almost any you know, prominent Civil War program across the country. So it is kind of a happenstance thing, and so every state project has to sort of create their own coalition on the ground that makes sense for them. And I think the thing that we're concerned about, reaching back to the metadata question, is that ultimately the product is the same, right? That at the end of the day, we can all spit out a baseline, you know, TEI document that everybody's interface can read, even if our interfaces are different, right? But the underlying search tools that we all have built in there can look across each one of our products and deliver one sort of set of results to the user. Everything else up the chain of how we get there is open to sort of everybody else trying to figure out with the support and the help and the experience of everybody. But ultimately, that's got to be a state by state thing.
That's great. I wonder if we could also, we've had also touched upon the question of how these can work not only for scholars, but for a broader public. And I wonder, Julia, if we could ask you to start us off with your experience as a public historian about the ways of what kind of work you think these documents and collections can do in helping to get a public educated and interested in the history of this period.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, as public historians, and I know that there are some among us and there are some in the audience, I'd say that, we conceptualize our practice as something that goes beyond, being a historian in public or doing historical work in public, but that, really encompasses building partnerships with what I sometimes call the interested public. So those people who perhaps belong to the histories we tell, those who have a special interest in it, affinity for it, and certainly those who are already working to preserve it with or without the help of scholars like us with credentials, right? So we're inherently collaborative. And so I think this is such a natural space for me, and I think for others in the group. And I just want to say that it's clear to me that this is a group of like-minded scholars and practitioners who are very much concerned about the way in which our projects will serve the public. So as a public historian, I think about my role in this as a kind of an audience advocate, so that I'm thinking of ways that we can build in collaboration with the interested public for creative ends. But I think all of us know that partnership is a two-way street. So we're building something that I think will benefit so many different kinds of people, but that we also benefit by including the voices of our communities into what we're doing. So multiple perspectives that we can bring in can shape the outcome of what we actually build. So not only the kind of platforms and how we build and think about accessibility, for example, but actually how we interpret and make meaning from the records. And so I think, it's a thrill to work with this consortium because I mentioned the ADAH's long history in working with Alabama communities, but also the folks in Kentucky and Susannah and Steph are already doing public outreach that I would, kick the ball to them to talk about what they're doing, what we're talking, from the Alabama side of things, we're sort of prospecting, right? That we plan to include multiple perspectives, but Susannah and Patrick and Chuck are doing that work.
Yeah, just quickly, in the exhibit, the sample doc site that Steph built for us, I mean, one of the things we included, and this was part of the grant that we received from the National Archives, was funding to pay secondary educators to design lesson plans for each of the 4 themes. Because you're right, I mean, the last thing we want to do is get all these records up online. They're accessible, but nobody really kind of knows how to use them. And the last thing you want to tell an educator who is already underpaid and overworked is, well, just start surfing through these thousands of documents and you'll figure it out. So one of the things Patrick helped me think through very early on was that, yeah, let's get some educators involved from the very start, write these lesson plans. We work with the kind of the head of kind of education and outreach at the State Archives, a gentleman by the name of Al Wheat. And, we're going to be working with him to design videos. If you've seen the project Freedom on the Move, one of the things they do is they interview educators who've used these documents in the classroom, so that the last thing a secondary teacher needs to hear from me is that these will work wonderfully in the classroom, right? And they're looking at me like, that's adorable, but you don't teach 8th graders. But if you actually can hear it from somebody who's used these, and yeah, this is really powerful when you start to get students, as young as 5th graders working with some of these documents, or your seniors and juniors, using these to really analyze what they're learning in the textbook as opposed to what they're reading about on the ground. This is incredible. And Julia's right. I mean, you want to do this as early as possible with these projects to get these in the hands of the public so that we can learn.
Yeah, and following up on what Susannah is saying, right, I'm working on some grants right now that's really trying to essentially, right, this kind of cyclical nature of the consortium is we started with an NEH grant these past 3 years that did several different, each year kind of had its own like capstone educational activity, ranging from a agricultural simulating board game to an election of 1864 simulation, right? We're like promoting that now because the election that's coming up. But kind of thinking of now following and learning from what Susannah is doing. How can we get educators involved to actually build materials for us, right? Like I taught college classes, but I come at the education side one particular way. And working hopefully with some local scholars and local education programs to start building out tools built by teachers for teachers, I think would be a really great way. Again, I think this shows how the 3 projects work really well together, because Susannah was doing this and I was like, I'm going to do that too. I'm totally just going to not steal it. I'm going to cite her and I'm going to borrow it from her, right? Like this nice cyclical development of those parts of the project.
I was going to say, oh, steal it. I mean, Patrick basically
Okay, fine, I'll steal it.
under his wing and taught me everything as I was starting. So go for it.
And if I could just circle back to also to the use of students, both graduates, and we're hoping Julia is planning to teach her a course in the spring with undergraduates to get them involved so that they learn the skills and they have exposure to these kind of documents. And so for us too, I think particularly in the age we're living in and the idea of, continuing to train graduate students, whether they're masters or even PhDs, I feel like we have to be open-minded about these kind of projects. I mean, that's one of the main reasons that I wanted to be involved, because I still believe that we need trained historians. We need individuals with PhDs, but that they could have these tools coming out of our program here at Alabama. One of my own students has one of those research positions right now with Kentucky, and it's been incredibly valuable to him that he'll have that on his CV, that he's directly involved. So it's, yes, we're hoping to bridge and make connections with a wider public, but we're also, I feel that we are thinking about our own profession and moving forward into well into this digital age that we're living in. I think the pandemic has just sped everything up in that sense, right? That all of us that can't get to the archives and when we normally would, or can't even go to the library, for goodness sakes, to even take books out. That it's forced this in the sense that kind of a reckoning with how we access materials and who gets access. So that's another aspect.
I think it's also, if I might real quick, I think it's also important to recognize that that this is a way to give history back to communities. Archives, historical societies, universities are often extractive, right? Like we suck things out of communities and we keep them in our professional hoards. And that is also true for brain drain and talent attraction into urban and university spaces, right? I come from a county in rural Kentucky, right? And so for me, as a person who would regularly go out to give talks to county historical societies and things, to take these documents back and have them freely accessible and to show people how to use them and how to get back in touch with things that had originated in their county but had come to Frankfurt in 1863 and had stayed there since. To be able to put them in touches with voices of people with their same last names. It was incredibly powerful, and we could watch on Google Analytics and kind of snoop on people as they really did take that to heart after you would put in some time and do a workshop down in a county, and you could see for weeks afterwards that continued engagement as the members of that county historical society started sharing. You could tell, right? And family groups and surnames would start to get searched in all these permutations. And again, that was really those dynamics we often don't think of because we operate sort of at these centers of intellectual power wherever we are, but they're incredibly important.
Thank you so much. So we are amazingly gonna hit up against an hour pretty soon. We don't have to be doctrinaire about exactly an hour. And we have a number of questions, some of which are I think can be answered relatively quickly in the Q&A. So we thought we'd try a speed round of responding to some of the Q&A questions. Any of the projects incorporating GIS mapping to help researchers approach the material by location?
Absolutely. Patrick helped as he was leaving on kind of with some of our volunteers locating where Union soldiers came from, but we actually had a discussion this week about how we could start mapping either emancipation or movements of armies and kind of those contested spaces through those documents. And my goal, like for my team, is now, I think there's several of them on here, so yay, listen to this, right? We're going to try and hopefully produce a couple maps, like one each year for the next couple of years, which will build data out of the project. You said speed round, so I'm moving quick.
Yes, every single one of our documents is being geolocated. If it includes any place, it's getting geolocated with us. And we're actually extraordinarily lucky at USM. We formed a relationship with our computer sciences department, and they are going to help us actually create a free and open source new mapping technology to be able to map some of the different places that are being geolocated throughout our document. So look for that coming soon from USM.
That's great. So many possibilities for that. One question, just a little more. I know Cecily Zander is helping us with this. Is to put up the. Is there actually a website for the Alabama project? And a question from an Alabama project fan: is there an ETA for digitized documents from the Alabama project?
Not yet. And we wanted to share the archives website because they are in the process now of digitizing these documents. We hope sometime in the new year to move forward with with these issues of the metadata, and also making decisions about the transcription. So we felt like we were on a pretty good schedule, and then the pandemic hit. And that's just, as I know everybody in their lives right now, it's sort of thrown time out the window. But we've been back in conversations this fall. And so I would say sometime hopefully in the spring. And we want to develop also, one of the things we realized we don't have that Mississippi and Kentucky has is a logo. So we want a logo. And Julie is hoping to get some help from some of our own students here at Alabama. I think in marketing, is that who you're talking to, Julia? Which I love that idea. So yeah, we are really just starting. I'm thrilled to hear some of the interest and excitement about it because we have it right now. So stay tuned. It's going to be coming. We're working at it now.
Thanks so much. Here's another one that came in to the papers. Also speak to interstate relationships in the era. I see lots of heads nodding.
Yeah, and not only between sort of government to government, and also federal state relations for us are hugely important and really underlooked at. And obviously we know that in Kentucky there's fighting between multiple governors and the Lincoln administration over issues of emancipation. So having an insight into that is really fascinating. But also the sort of the on the ground rollout of things like land grant universities is really cool to watch. But I think not only the thing that struck me the most about interstate relations was not just at this intergovernmental level, but also at this business and commerce level. There's this really wonderful run of commissioners of deeds appointments, and they're basically out-of-state notaries that are the grease of all interstate commerce in major cities. And so watching as those people applied to have those commissions renewed, and you can also get a sense of how quickly business is restored in certain Confederate states, or as Union Army comes to occupy them, because you start to see those commissioner of deeds applications start peppering back in. And so it is this really good marker of, okay, now there's enough commerce to warrant this. So across the ways, they're really fascinating. And then also for us, being able to watch, especially during the McGoffin administration in 1861-62, all of the deep sort of secessionist politics that are happening as folks up and down the Mississippi River trying to suck Kentucky into the Confederacy, and understanding how those overlapped with existing commercial networks that had to do with slavery and cotton and everything else. There's fantastic research to be done there.
And you all mentioned too that eventually with the multiple projects in the consortium that everything should be searchable together when it's kind of up and running. Another really quick question, because we know that you mentioned earlier, Kentucky had 5, I think you said, Civil War governors, both Union and Confederate. So somebody wants to know how many Civil War governors there were in Mississippi and Alabama.
You can't separate Reconstruction from the Civil War, so I'm going to take you all the way through. 8 governors under 9 administrations. Adelbert Ames served twice.
Yeah, well, I don't know if the archivists out there want to help us with this question, but we are starting with the antebellum administration of Andrew Moore, who was governor from 1857 to 1868, and we're ending with Rufus Cobb, and who was in office until 1882. And within those years, Some governors, my understanding is archivists told us that they have very, very little. They're hoping maybe to pull in some materials from outside of the archives. But for us, we wanted, as I think I said earlier, we want this. We're very much interested in this idea of the long Civil War, the long 19th century, in the sense that we want to wanted to anchor in the antebellum era, and not just stop things. Not even 1876. We're going into the 1880s, so that we can be much more expansive in the kind of broad questions we're asking, and again, in rethinking, the significance of the war, frankly. So that's what I would say. But again, if the archivists in the audience want to say more, or feel free to follow up with them through their website. I encourage anybody interested to do that.
All right. So one more question was about the ways that the papers not only reveal, the papers not only reveal the Civil War, but also the local civil wars taking place, and the kind of things that have been a source of a great deal of terrific recent literature. Where do what are some of the findings, what are some of the ways that people might discover things about these either guerrilla conflicts or local aspects of the Civil War?
I know Patrick dealt a lot more with like some of the guerrilla letters during his time, but one of my favorite stories is about, Patrick actually told me this story as we were driving up to do a promotion event last June, where a guy gets robbed of his money by, I think he was being robbed by a guerrilla named Keller, right? And he's being robbed, and they capture the guy like 2 weeks later or something like that. So he goes to the jail, he collects his money. As he walks out, he pulls out his gun and he shoots the guy, and it ends this like long tale of this guy who's been harassing, right, Mount Sterling area, kind of like northern Kentucky. So you can kind of see, and then you actually get one of the governors, Bramlett, writing like, "Yep, no, this is okay. I don't care. Kill the guerrilla. Cool, good story. Like, good for him. Don't even bother about it." So you can see these little interactions as people are appealing for aid to protect themselves from guerrillas, but then also how these personal stories play out of, oh yeah, I got robbed, but I totally just exacted vengeance and I got away with it. Patrick always describes it.
And did a good thing for avenging the combat wounded major of the 18th Kentucky who was home after Chickamauga, and they drug him out of his bed and shot him. No, I think the county level dynamics of this are really important, and they're important in all of these states, which are so geographically diverse. And as you move sort of into the different regions of the state, the local politics and the factions and the combinations of people, the pre-existing antebellum animosities that are generations in the making. Is especially on people who kind of live on geographic fault lines between regions. We see this. My favorite dynamic is the war that continues via the county court. So rebellion is criminalized in Kentucky, and so if a county's Confederate majority leaves or is politically disabled, then the Unionist minority, which was presumably a Whig minority for 30 years before this, can all of a sudden start indicting everybody for anything they want to. And then as soon as the rebels get back in 1865 and they have their political rights restored, then they get counter indictments for everything that happened on the other hands, right? And so these are local dynamics that really, and once you're able to correlate these names with census records, and you can understand sort of where these things are, there's no better sort of opinion polling. There's geography of loyalty and political affiliation that we can start to kind of feel out right now. But again, once we get the mapping stuff and the more the social networking up online, you're really going to be able to do some interesting things.
Just we're looking to wrap up, but we have a couple more that I'd like to get in. One that just came in about the ways that the projects are looking to name. The question is about naming women when writing annotations, and I think more generally about the ways that the papers can not only can be utilized for women's history as they have been.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. One of the things we're doing with our you can see it at our website. We just kind of referred to briefly as our tagging protocols, but is to, we're obviously tagging individuals by their names, but you sometimes will have women, for example, for whom we may just particularly have a first name. We think the last name, if there's a husband mentioned, that might be it, maybe it's not. And so what we've developed are ways to tag just about every particular situation, but we're also clustering individuals kind of into what we're kind of referring to as these kind of social identifiers, so that kind of these groupings that develop in societies. So for example, widows, military families, are there ways to identify enslaved peoples, for example, who you will only have perhaps maybe a first name. And so I know we're trying to be brief here, but you can look at our tagging protocols at cwrgm.org to see how we're doing that. And this is also something we're exploring with digital humanities experts at UVA and Duke right now. The consortium is where we're trying to think about this issue of discoverability. And I mean, from the page lets us basically tag and spotlight connections as we're transcribing. We don't have to kind of wait for the annotation phase right now. And so we're developing these maps and these connections to make sure that underrepresented groups in historical research can be discovered. And how can we keep doing that in better ways? And how can we kind of learn from each other's projects, so that as groups like Alabama are just starting up, how can they kind of learn from, others who've kind of come before them with those discoverability efforts?
It's so cool. And I just think it's so fabulous to hear like ways that different institutions are drawing on one another, not just in your collaboration, but across the different areas and different places that have been thinking about these questions of digital humanities. Since we're kind of running short on time, I want to recognize Steve Murray, I think is an archivist from Alabama, who's here, who's been contributing to the Q&A and mentioning that Alabama had 11 governors between 1860 and 1882, just to get clear on that. That's a lot of governors. And Steve wanted to kind of ask the question about the extent to which the Kentucky or Mississippi projects are thinking about these projects as furthering the goal of training people in the field of public history. And maybe we could just kind of fold that into our broader sort of wrap-up question, which is to the people who are here who might not be very familiar with these projects or might be very interested in them and wanting to know more, how do people get involved? How do they reach out to you if they're interested in doing research in the projects, if they're interested in helping out? How would you suggest that people get involved with what you're doing?
So for us, one of the big things that Patrick did, and I think Brianna Kirk and Melissa DeVelvis were in this chat, right? We're continuing the pattern of seeing who can get the most like call outs, right, from individual projects. But they were GRAs, and Lesley had mentioned one of her students that is currently a GRA with us. So through funding through the NHPRC, we hire 2 graduate students every year to help annotate the documents, pending that we get the funding for next year. I'm not going to say any more to jump that shark or to get out ahead of that before we hear next month. But that gives graduate students the opportunity to annotate over 100 documents. They have weekly meetings with us. So they get to sit down with the team and actually really learn how we do the research and building these annotations and kind of the footnoting or the annotating side of the documentary edition. So that's definitely one of the ways that we can encourage people to use this, and it opens up new career paths. I think the NCPH recently said that like document editing made up like 2% of jobs or something like that out there. So it's a small number, but hey, we're all looking for ways to help grad students out, and that's one of them.
And one of the things that I enjoyed about those weekly calls and check-ins were, eventually once the grad students got familiar with the research, they didn't really have any more research questions. We'd kind of run through all of that. And then by that time you develop genuine relationships and you were friendly with them, right? And so it came time to start talking about, like if it was grant writing season, we'd be talking about how we were crafting that application, what we were going to put in there, how we were trying to market the project now, what are our plans for education and follow through. Those sort of administrative things that gave them an insight into how the project sustained itself. One of the best things that I had an opportunity to do as a grad student when I was working at KHS was to sit in at meetings about funding and administration where I wasn't expected to say anything, but I was just there to sit and observe. And I think being part of these projects, because the teams are so collaborative and small, you have that really excellent opportunity to pick up a lot of things that you just wouldn't otherwise.
And I want to make sure I mention Aaron Phillips is my student. I apologize for.
I didn't say his name. I'm sorry.
But yeah, we are. And if anybody is, again, very interested in, particularly in Alabama, feel free to reach out to Julia or myself through our department website. I think I asked Cicely to put that up. We want to get the public involved, and one of the things we've been talking with the archivists about, is doing that kind of crowd sharing, transcribing from the page, and so that's very much could be coming into play sometime next year. but we love to hear from people that are interested and share their own expertise. Yeah, this is meant to be a collaborative endeavor, and I'm sure anybody can tell from listening to us today, it's a complex one, right? And it takes a lot of people and a lot of effort and commitment. And so we welcome that. So just feel free to contact us if you'd like to find out more about Alabama.
And for Mississippi, I'll just briefly say, if you go to cwrgm.org and go click on Get Involved, our lead researcher, Lindsay Peterson, just made an awesome transcription training video. It's brief, we promise. And then you can find us at From the Page and start transcribing. We not only need volunteers, we just, yay, come work with us. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook.
We want to thank you all. Were you about to say something, Julia? No, okay, I saw a gesture. I didn't want to be. We are so grateful for all of you all joining us, and for those of you who came and submitted questions, and hope that we got to most of them, especially in the new introduction of the speed round. Really exciting, things, the documents that people have worked with individually and separately, and to really start to see their accessibility. And to see what comes from this ability to stitch together these, quite different ways of producing them in different states. So what a rich and exciting set of projects for its implications for scholarship, for digital history, for public history. And we're really grateful for your work and for your appearance. We are also extremely grateful for the presence of, invisible presence, presumably, of Matt Isham and Cecily Zander, without whom none of this would happen in terms of both establishing, setting up, and running the technological side of it. And especially as we threw a curveball of additional panelists this time at them. So got to flex some new technological muscles, and thus far with no catastrophe. So we greatly appreciate all of their work. And we also just want to remind people that there will be the next one will be Thursday, December the 3rd, same time, 4 p.m. Eastern, with Dr. Alexandra Fenley on an intimate economy, enslaved women, work, and America's domestic slave trade. So we appreciate all of your time and all of your excitement today, and can't wait to see how they continue to develop.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
right.
everybody.
Okay, take care. Thank you.
Thank you all.